All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the time zone you're in. My name is Helen Thomas, and this is the CDFM study group. I put the word study group on there to make sure that everyone understands I do not work for the ASMC. I am not the EDFMT, which is the 1-week course offered by the ASMC. So I do not go through the material in the same manner they do. What I do is similar to if you're going to college, you're taking a training, each individual come with their own study guides, material, and then we come together and we go over the material. What I offer is I'm able to help you to break down the material so that you understand it. And when you see it again on an exam, it's easier for you to recall the information. Do I have any questions on the format of how this runs? And I'll highlight some things as I move along with the session. Any questions that anyone would like to ask at the beginning? So the idea is you already have your study guide. Okay, go ahead. I'm opening up for questions, comments. All right, so a couple of things also. The reason you need your study guide, because you need to read the material, study the material before you come to the sessions, or it's going to be confusing to you. The reason it's going to be more confusing is because I do not go through page by page. I am highlighting the key things on the pages so that you understand the concept. If you've never taken any portion of the CDFM exam, then you'll be overwhelmed. And you're overwhelmed because the questions are not going to come at you directly from the book. It's not going to say, what does the president do? Okay, the president does XYZ. You have to understand the process. That's what we're going to go over. You're going to have to understand the key documents that is produced in each one of these processes. And you have to know the key individuals. Where do they work? And remember, this is a Department of Defense level exam. So that means the processes we're talking about is most likely above the DOD. And so we're going to go over some terms, and they're going to be questions. I'm going to ask questions. I expect feedback because I need to know your level of understanding. So that's why for this 2023, I'm going to use Teams, since a lot of people are moving over to the Teams process. So if there are no burning questions, we can go ahead and begin. So I'm not showing slides, so I'm sorry if you do not have your study guides with you. Go on the ASMC website. I don't want ASMC come looking for me, saying that I'm taking money out of their pocket by sharing the material. So I do not share any material. I give you the direction. I give you the website for you to go and purchase your own study guide. All right, so I'm starting on page 115, which goes into the federal legislative process. So I've been doing the study group since 2011. So while I was in uniform, I was doing them little groups, and I continued as a DA civilian. So I kind of know some of the areas to focus on, what's not as important. So on page 5, the federal legislative process, don't necessarily focus so much on remembering the years these events occurred. For instance, Declaration of Independence, July 4th, don't even worry about it. Learn the order in which they occur. So if I said the Constitution ratified and the Declaration of Independence, you need to know, okay, Declaration of Independence came first, Articles of Confederation, then the Constitution was ratified, and then the Constitution took effect. So that is all I'm going to say about that top portion. Understanding that we have a separation of power. So when you go to page 6, 7, it talks about the Constitution, the 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. That is the order you need to learn them. The first branch is the legislative / Congress. Second is, hold on, somebody's trying to get in. Try to multitask. See how well I can do this. All right, multitask. All right, and executive is the president. And then you also have the judicial branch or the courts, executive, president, judicial branch. The purpose of you learning them in that order is starts on page 8. Because in the Constitution, you have Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3. And they directly align with legislative, executive, and judicial. That's your first lesson for today. Which part of the Constitution governs what Congress does? Article 1. Article 2 talks about what the president can do, or the executive branch. And Article 3 talks about what the courts are allowed to do, the judicial courts. So does everyone understand? Legislative, executive, judicial. Legislative and Congress is the same thing. Executive and the president is the same thing. And then judicial or courts is the same thing. Any questions on that portion? And I promise you, it seems simple, but when you got that clock ticking because you're taking an exam, a lot of people forget the simple stuff. And so that's the purpose of me. I'm going to keep repeating these things. So on page 8, we start with Article 1, the legislative branch. And what we're going to look at is some of the things that Congress is allowed to do based on the Constitution. The reason you want to know if it's a function of Congress, the executive branch, or the judicial branch, because on the exam, you're probably going to see it in a multiple choice type scenario. And they might say, they give you the list of the function, and then you have to say which branch of government is responsible for that function. So for example, Article 1, Section 1 talks about all legislative powers granted, is vested in the Congress, so it says that Congress shall have the Senate and House of Representatives. So Congress has 2 parts, House of Representatives and the Senate. For some of you, this may be real basic, but I have to start here because it builds upon the basic knowledge. If I say anything you do not understand or I confuse you, please pause me, ask me a question at any point so that we do not continue and then you still have that burning question at the back of your mind. All right. So 2 parts of Congress. Section 2 says the House of Representatives will serve 2 years. Again, I'm not going to read word for word. When you study, round 1 is you need to read it like you're reading a book, a novel. Read it for what it says, word for word. Round 2, when you read the same material, you read it and you make notes. Highlight. I wouldn't say highlight because a lot of people, even though I love colors, but a lot of people like to just highlight and then you don't know what to study. So I like a pen or pencil. So I have a pen on my book. On the sides, I circle things. I write notes on the side of the important things in that particular sentence or paragraph. Then the 3rd time you study the material, then I just focus on the highlighted things I have on that page. So at least 3 times you're going to have to go through each material. You are not studying to memorizing what's on the page. You're studying to understand the process. What are they talking about? So what you've already learned, who could tell me what are some of the things we already learned? While I drink some water.
The first 3 articles correspond with the various branches of government. So Article 1 is Congress, then Article 2 is the executive, and then Article 3 is the judiciary, in that order.
Outstanding. Anything else? Did we pick up on anything else? And this is study group, so this is not me throwing material at you. Feedback is how you learn. So if you say something incorrect, I can correct it at that point. All right. So Congress has how many parts of it? How many parts are there to Congress based on Article 1?
House and the Senate.
Go ahead, Ms. Banga. I see you.
Can you hear me?
Congress has two parts, right? What are they?
The House and the Senate. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, now I can. Go ahead.
Okay, it has the House and the Senate.
The House and the Senate. That's going to become important later on. So that's why I'm repeating these little intricate details. A House and a Senate. And most people don't pay attention when, like, the budget, what's going on with the budget, whether it's in the House side, we don't pay attention until times like this. So House, Senate, how long of a term does the House of Representative personnel serve? Based on Section 2 on that page.
2 years.
Think I heard it. I know these volumes, I got to get me some external speakers. 2 years. So House of Representatives serve 2 years. Section 3 talks about the senators. What is the term of a senator? Based on that paragraph. I'll give you time. The senators, anybody can answer. Senators serve how long is their term?
6 years.
6 years. It's in that paragraph, I promise you. So study group means, and I'm going to reiterate as people keep coming on, study group means I'm not reading page for page or line by line. That is your job when you're studying to read line by line. Okay, so I'm going to try to multitask and read. Okay, somebody got kicked out of team. All right, I see you, Miss Tina. All right. All right, so what else we have? Section 7, Congress can raise revenue, right? So what you're doing, what I'm doing is reading the paragraph, then pull out what's important. Then write it off to the side of your paperwork. So what does it talks about? They can raise revenue. Every bill which shall pass the House and the Senate shall become law. Okay, we're going to talk about that later. On the top of page 9, Article 1, Section 7, talks about when the president receives a bill, and we're going to go over, let's see, a few pages in the front. It talks about what a bill is. So the book is kind of not in the order I would put it in because I want to first explain the terms. But on the top of page 119, you see where it says if any bill not returned by the president within 10 days, that 10 days is going to become important a little bit, it shall become law. If Congress is in session and the president receives a bill and he does not sign it within 10 days, that bill automatically becomes law. So that will be repeated again at a later time. All right. Section 8. Section 8 says that Congress can, what's important to us, the power to lay and collect taxes. That is the power of Congress. I would tell you that is one of the most important part of it. If you read through the bullets you see there, talks about Congress can borrow money on credit and so forth. You can read through those other ones, but the biggest part is collect taxes and declare war. If you read through, you'll see it is the power of Congress to declare war. Section 8. And Section 9, if you don't remember none of them, please, Article 1, Section 9, as a financial manager, it doesn't matter which branch of service you work for, you need to know what Section 9 says, because this is the law, this is the reason that the government shuts down if we don't have an appropriation, because Constitution says no money shall be drawn from the treasury, but in consequence of appropriation made by law and a regular statement of account receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. Okay, so we got to do some auditing, and you can't take any money out of the federal bank or the country's bank, which is the Treasury, unless you have an appropriation law. Or what is an alternative to the appropriation law? Who could tell me what is an alternative to the passing the budget? What happens before they actually pass the budget? And if it doesn't happen, then the government shuts down. All right, so I'm gonna
Continuing
trust you.
resolution.
Continuing
continuing resolution.
resolution, right? So the
Oh, yeah,
purpose,
I typed CRs in there. Yeah, okay.
okay, hold on, okay, let me put the chat thing on, because I can't. I'm trying to jump back and forth. All right, now
Oh,
I
I'm
got it
sorry.
on. So
I'm sorry.
I can see you now. I can see the chat now. All right, so the purpose you get the continuing resolution for October is because if they do not use that temporary appropriation, according to this section 9, the government must shut down, because you can't do nothing without money, and you can't get money out of the bank, which is the Treasury, unless you have that appropriation law in place. So if you don't remember none of these sections for Article 1, make sure you know that section 9. No money could come out of the Treasury unless we have an appropriation law. Any question on Article 1? Legislative or Congress? And I keep repeating that because sometimes on exams, they might say Congress. Congress has the power to declare war, or the president has the power to declare war. No, he doesn't. Who has the power based on the Constitution? It's the Congress, the legislative branch. So, all right. On page 10, 1110, it goes into Article 2, which governs the executive branch. The executive branch or the president. Interchangeable. The purpose of Congress is to make the laws. Legislative laws, make the laws. The executive branch or the president executes the laws. So there's only 3 sections for the president. Section 1 says the term. So we know it says 4 years, right? A president serves a 4-year term based on Article 2, Section 1. Section 2 talks about the president being the commander-in-chief of our military forces, right? That's the main thing it talks about. You can read through the rest of it, but that's the main thing. All right, I'm gonna give y'all a couple of minutes to read Section 3 and tell me, what is that talking about? And okay. And then relate it to the State of the Union address. You hear it when the president does the State of the Union address. So either tell me what's in the paragraph or explain to me what's the purpose of the State of the Union address. Because they both answer the same question. Okay, Ms. Tina, I see your hand up.
Yes, hi, Miss Helen. Hi, everyone. The purpose of the State of the Union is for the president to let Congress as well as the American people know what his plans are to have, hopefully, his or her Congress, what's the right word I'm looking for, as far as what budget is going to be spent on,
Right.
as far as whatever
I think you're
ideals they
looking for the
have.
word priorities, right?
Yes, and that's
Priority.
what the purpose of the State of the Union is.
And if you read Section 3, that is pretty much what it's saying. It's putting Congress on notice. Hey, these are my priorities. These are the things that's important to me. These are my focus. I like how you throw in his or her or him.
It's gonna happen one day.
The future is upon us, right? But that's what happens. So in the State of the Union, because it's not listed here, but it's important for you to tie it. Once you get through all the material, you're going to see how a lot of the information overlap with each other. And that's why you have to study to learn, to understand, instead of memorizing what's there. So Section 3 is done by the State of the Union address, when he's letting Congress know what his priorities or her priorities for the country for the upcoming year year or years is going to be. So execute the laws. Those are the three primary things based on the Constitution, give you general things that the separation of power is allowed to do. And then the third one is Article 3, judicial powers, your courts, the Supreme Courts, your lower courts. They interpret the law. That's the only purpose of it, is we have a law, and then somebody does something that someone else disagrees with, they take it to the courts, and then the courts decide, okay, is this legal or is it not legal? That's their job. Interpret what the law says for it to make sense. So the judicial powers is invested in that Supreme Court or the inferior courts. All right, so that's all I'm going to say about separation of powers. Any question on Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, three branches of government, legislative or Congress, executive or president, judicial or the courts, and what they do? Because when you have a list of things, that means if I'm writing an exam and I don't see the ASMC exam, again, I'm not an ASMC employee, but I've been an instructor teaching the PPBE course, and I kind of know as an instructor how tests are written. Is they'll give you multiple choice, and based on knowing what right looks like, you'll be able to determine what's wrong with that question. And if you all have general questions on the CDFM, I'll do my best to try and answer those, or I can link you up with the people who can do that for you. All right, so let's move to page 1112, the legislative process. What's another name for legislative? And not you, Mr. Brian.
Congress,
Congress.
Congressional.
All right, I'm gonna have to cut Tina off too. I need some feedback. I promise you, this is how you get more comfortable with the material and being confident in your response. Is you have to say it out loud. You have to share it in a forum like this. You don't want to wait till you get an exam. You pay your $100 and then have to walk out like, I didn't do too good. Because you want to be able to rattle off this stuff before you get into that. All right, so legislative process. So what we're going to look at is some of these definition of what's going on. So when we talk about laws later on, we understand what we're talking about. So a bill on page 12 is a general proposal, If someone wants an action to be put into law, then they introduce it through a bill. And if y'all in my age group, then y'all remember that Schoolhouse Rock video we used to watch on the weekends. You know, I'm just a bill. I'm only a bill. Okay, am I the only one who remember that? You know, when they used to
No,
teach
I
you on the
remember it.
weekend.
I just couldn't sing it right now if I tried hard, but I remember it.
Yeah, right. When they used to actually teach you things on the weekends instead of regular cartoons. All right, so a bill is a general proposal. Hey, we want this to become law. Here's the information. When you read through that paragraph, what you'll see is a bill, and in order for it to become law, it has to go to the president. So that's a couple of things: general proposal, legislative proposal, and it has to go to the president to be signed to become law. Joint resolution. The word joint tells you you're coming together. So don't forget, Congress has two sides of it. It has a House of Representatives and it has a Senate. We just went through that drill, right? Who owns the House, who owns the Senate? So joint resolution may come from either side, originate either in the House of Representatives or in the Senate side. A joint resolution also has to end up going to the president for the president to sign for it to become law. So they gave you an example of a joint resolution. If they want to change something in the current Constitution and both sides agree, they do a joint resolution to try to introduce it to get the president to sign for that to become the new or the change in the Constitution. So joint resolution. Then you have, so these are different forms of proposing law requests. Concurrent resolution, matters affecting either or. It's either affecting the House or it's affecting the Senate side. Usually initiated by means of concurrent resolution. So concurrent resolution, and the next one on the top of page 13, simple resolution, is either or. So simple resolution is a matter that only affects one side or the other, not both. So that's the difference between concurrent and simple. Concurrent and simple do not need to go to the president for signature. Those are actions internal to Congress on both sides, that either it's an action that affect both of them, and the concurrent, and they want to come to a resolution internally in how they're going to, let's say, look at the president's budget. How are they going to, what are going to be their priorities? Or if it's an action that is a simple resolution where it only affects one side of Congress. So you got bills, joint resolution, concurrent resolution, and simple resolution. Who do these proposals come from is on page 13 at the bottom. Origins. So there's only 3 ways in which the legislation can be proposed. It's either can be recommended by the president, and what was the activity where the president recommends their priorities? You could tell me what that is. And it's mentioned in that first paragraph, recommended by the president. State of the Union, right? Y'all see that? For those who have the books, recommended by the president. The Constitution provides that the president shall from time to time give to Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend to their consideration with such measures as he shall judge necessary. So it's the same thing. So legislation, the president can recommend, introduced by members. So, or committee. So remember, Congress has committees that's responsible for, let's say, Defense Committee. And then in the committee, they have individual members. So the 3 ways in which you can propose a legislation is recommended by the president, recommended by a committee, or recommended by a member. When you study, kind of like what I'm doing, because I've gone over this for a few times, is read it, then repeat it out loud so you can hear yourself saying those words. So when you see it again on a test, even though your mouth's closed, in your head, you're still reading it. So here and there, I'm going to be giving y'all some test taking techniques to help you through the process. All right, any question on the origins or who can propose legislation? Any questions at this time? Okay, moving along on page 14, kind of goes through what I was saying with the Schoolhouse Rock. So I either have a bill or joint resolution. It's introduced and referred to the committee, whichever committee is responsible. And for us, Defense Committee, for example, they have different committees for each appropriation. So it's introduced to the committee. If you read the paragraph on page 1114 under introduction and referral, you will see when it's introduced, it's placed in what's called a hopper, H-O-P-P-E-R. So you got to know these terms. The hopper is the where you put that proposal. The second part talks about consideration by committee, public hearings, markup, right? So think about when you submit an award or something for somebody, you do a write-up. I don't know about you, but I've never written something and it goes all the way through and somebody signs it. It always got to come back and somebody has questions, or whether it's grammatical or whether it's the activity. So it's considered, the committee looks at it, looks at the bill, and then they mark it up. They have questions. The public hearings are for you to come and justify your justification of why you need that funding, why you need that program. The top of page 15 talks about committee action. We're talking about Congress still. So what does what do they do? It says, once you get that marked up bill, right? You get that award, and I'm using an example of an award because everybody's familiar with evaluations or award. Once you mark it up, you get your hearings, then they send it back to the originator. Committee action, and page 15 talks about once you fix it, it's called a clean bill. So it starts off in the hopper, gets marked up, or the queue is the hopper, gets marked up, then it goes back to the originator and they produce a clean bill, which is gives the new number, right, for the processing. Then House and Senate floor consideration. Every action must go through the House floor and the Senate floor. Remember, Congress has two sides. So that's what it's talking about. And when you read the last sentence of that paragraph on page 15, says after the bill has passed one body, one side, the bill is now called an engrossed bill. So I'm circling that.
Miss Helen, can I stop you for a second? This is Tina.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
when it gets to House and committee floor consideration, in order for it to become an engrossed bill, it has to pass both sides, the House and the Senate, or one or the other, because we know it's going to go on to the next one.
One or the other.
Okay.
So it
Okay.
says as soon as it passes one, it's called engrossed.
Okay. Okay. I only asked it that way because it could, that's where on the test it could be confusing. Because if you would think the House and the Senate, or the House or the Senate. So it has to, does that make any sense what I'm saying?
Right, right.
Okay.
So that's what it's saying. If it once it passes one side, then it's called an engrossed bill.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
then it goes on the other side, and actually that leads into the other part, resolving differences. So only one bill can go to the president for the president to sign for it to become law. So there are instances, because you have two sides of Congress, and that's why when you look on the elections and they're like, well, the Democrats control this side and the Republicans control this side, because they're trying to control, each party wants to control the full, both sides of the House and the Senate, because only one document can go forward. So once it's engrossed, on one side, the same document has to get looked at on the other side. Let's say the House approves and then it goes to the Senate, and they also have to look at the same. Of course, they're not going to agree. They're going to have differences. So the next part of the conference committee, anytime you hear the word conference committee, that should trigger, that is when the House and the Senate comes together to resolve differences. That is the only time in this study guide you're going to hear the word conference. So it's either the conference committee, or if you look at the end of this paragraph, it's called a third chamber. You got the House, the Senate, and then the conference committee. So I'm going to say this here about the conference committee. So the House and the Senate comes together to resolve differences. It does not matter if the House brings one member and the Senate brings 10 people together in the conference. They're speaking as one voice for the House or the Senate. So when they vote, they have one vote on one side and the other one have one vote on the other side. And I'm repeating that because on the exam, it can become confusing if you're thinking, well, hey, if they bring 10 people and we only bring one, then they win. Well, no, think about what they're doing. So that's why I say think of it in the essence of understanding the process. So the purpose of the conference committee or the third chamber is for both sides of the Congress to come together to resolve differences. Any question on that? So these are congressional actions. These are things Congress does internally. Any other questions? Okay, I don't hear any. All right, so let's move over to page one. Let's see, actually, no, page 16, 1116. And then the final step. So once the House and the Senate resolve their differences in the conference, they have that one identical document now that they all signed off on, all meaning the House and the Senate. They go back to their respective places, and that final bill, that one bill, is then enrolled and submitted for the president to sign to become law. So that's the other term on page 16, enrolled. So it's placed in the hopper, then you clean up your mess. It's a clean bill. Then you have, when one side of the House or the Senate agrees on that bill or signs off on it, it's an engrossed bill. To resolve differences, the House and the Senate has to come together. They resolve the difference, and then in that third chamber, and then the final document is enrolled and submitted to the president for the president to sign. That's the story. All right. So when you learn something, go over it again without looking at the paper. Can you talk through the process without looking at the paper? All right. So page 17 now says, once they give that bill to the president, what are the presidential options? What are the options the president have with that bill? Just because Congress agrees with it and they both made an agreement, when it gets to the president might say, you know what, I don't agree with this. So let's look at that. The first bullet on page 17 says approval and signature. All right, that means the president gets the document. Remember, 10 days, the 10 days we learned in the front. According to the law, the president has 10 days to either sign it or return it. What is it called when he returns it? He or she returns that bill. What is it called? Anybody?
Veto? The veto?
Veto.
Veto.
Veto,
Oh, okay.
right? We haven't gotten there yet, but I just kind of wanted you to start thinking about it. So the two I'm going to go over first is the first and the last one. President gets the bill, he likes it, everything agrees with everything on it, he or she signs it, it becomes law. Or he reviews the bill and he vetoes the bill because there's something on it he disagrees with. So under veto, the last one on that page, remember that part of our youth where they told us that the Congress can override the presidential veto. What is the vote that Congress must have in order to override the presidential veto? How much of the Congress can override? If Congress can come together, and they don't like, okay, he disagrees with us, but we can come together and we can override the presidential veto.
Is it
Mr.
like
Mize, you're welcome
two-thirds
to
of the
answer.
Congress?
2/3, right? So 2/3 vote, meaning Congress, if they don't like the veto and the president sending it back, they can override it. So that's what it's saying in the last paragraph on the bottom of page 17, and they can override it and it will become law. But again, you see how Congress works. They never really can, even if they're on the same party, we still can't agree on nothing. So I haven't seen where 2/3 can override. So that's number one and number four. All right, so let's look at the second one. It says, does not sign, but allows the bill to become law. How is that possible? Here are the conditions. Congress submits the bill to the president. Congress is in session. Like you see them on the 118, they're on TV now. Congress is in session. They submit a bill to the president for the president to sign, and the president does not sign it in how many days?
10.
10. And the president does not sign it in 10 days. That means that bill automatically becomes law. Let me repeat, because there's a different one in the pocket veto. He doesn't sign it, but it still becomes law. Congress in session, the president receives a bill to sign. He does nothing in 10 days. It does automatically become law.
Yes.
Whereas a pocket veto is different. Same scenario, the president receives a bill. He does not sign it within 10 days, but this one does not become law. What is the difference between number 2 and number 3? The pocket veto and does not sign, but still becomes law. Who could tell me the difference? Go ahead, Miss Tina.
On the pocket veto, the difference is because Congress is not in session.
Correct.
So with our prior Congresses and presidents, that's why Congress would pass something and then they would exit the building quickly. So that way certain things would just sit on the president's desk. So
Right. So it's just
neither
sit
here
there.
nor there, but that's generally how it works.
All right. So thank you for sharing. So pocket veto, the difference between the one where he doesn't sign it in 10 days and it becomes law is because Congress is there. They're in session. Pocket veto is Congress is not in session. They adjourned. They gone home, but the president has it on his desk. He hasn't looked at it within 10 days, but it's still not going to become law. So those are the conditions of the presidential action to approve or veto a bill. And actually, I didn't put it on this page, but it's something I need to say, or I'll say it again later. Let me see something. Any question on anything we've covered thus far? Okay, here, yeah, see, it's on the same page, on page 17, I want you all to write something in. It's actually listed on the very last page, page 1154, but I need for you to write it here and write line, L-I-N-E, item, I-T-E-M, veto. Because if you flip to the very last page, 1154, you will see a chart back there, and the third to the last, the third item from the bottom, it says the 1996 line item veto. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. I say to write it on this page because it's in line with this topic, and you got to be able to tie all the material together. So line item veto says that back in 1996, President Clinton, he was our president at the time. Up to that point, the presidents, when they received the bill, they were allowed to mark out. If they didn't like something in the bill, they were allowed to line through it, mark it out, and then sign the bill, and the bill became law. So eventually, I guess it took until I'm surprised it took that long. It took until 1996 for somebody to take it to the courts, and then the courts deemed it unconstitutional, meaning if the president does not like any portion of the bill, he has to send the entire document back. So I need for you to make sure that you on page 17 with the veto, the pocket veto, that you also are familiar with the term line item veto. That stopped, I think it was effective 1998 when the courts finally said that you can't do that. Just because you don't like a certain, which was good, I guess, for the president. If they didn't like something in the bill, they just marked it out and they could still sign it, and the rest of the bill became law. But whatever that particular member wanted or that committee was wiped out. So does everyone understand? Miss Tina, is your hand still up, or you just need to take it down? Or you have a question?
No,
Okay,
I'm good, ma'am. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. All right, so those are presidential action. Page 18, the budget cycle. So budget cycle goes, budget formulation, congressional action, what happens at Congress once the budget. So before we were talking about general proposal, general regular laws and so forth. Now we're getting ready to focus specifically on the budget, which is what we're in the business for. So the budget cycle, formulation, congressional action, budget execution. So at the bottom of page 18, 1 through 6 talks about what happens in the formulation. So I'm not going to go through all of that. OMB issues guidance. So let me pause right there. If you see an acronym, you need to know what the acronym stands for. Maybe they explained it further back in the book, but what does OMB stand for? For those of you who know it, please let us know. What does OMB stand for?
Is it the Office of Management and Budget?
Okay, yes, ma'am. Office of Management and Budget, OMB. Who do they work for? Which branch or who do they work for? Office of Management and Budget.
I'm not going to say anything else. I'm sorry.
All right. Somebody else, help her out. Who does OMB work for? All of the questions I'm asking you is essential because think about it, if you get a puzzle and I throw all these words at you and I'm trying to come up with a way how to present it on a video, is you need to be able to take the pieces. It used to be a game show and then put the pieces where they go. So when you see the acronym Office of Management and Budget or OMB, who do they work for? Anybody? The president. They are you could say chief financial officer, the budget folks, whatever, the money folks, but the Office of Management and Budget, because remember, we got Congress, they have their own budget office that we're going to talk about later. President has OMB. Who is the budget person for the DOD, Department of Defense? What's the title of that individual? And you're going to learn it in depth later also, so I'm not going to hold you to it. Under Secretary of Defense Comptroller, it's going to be important for you to know who works for whom. And then once I introduce documents, then you know, okay, well, who's responsible for this document? So USD Comptroller is at DOD level. That's the budget folks. OMB is with the president, and Congress has the Congressional Budget Office. So they got their own budget office. All right, so we got that. All right, so the budget formulation starts on 21, 22. Let me see, do I want to say anything on 21? Nope. They issue guidance, OMB reviews on page 22. 1/1/22, that paragraph on the OMB reviews. So in the fall timeframes, it says between September and late December is when Office of Management and Budget works with the agencies, the Department of Defense, Department of Education, Department of Safety, and whoever else. They have to review their budget for the next year, for their budget year with OMB. So what it says here is once the Office of Management and Budget do this fall review or final review, and they make their decisions on what they're going to submit to the president, then it's called the OMB passback. So I just want to make sure you don't miss that term there. So again, so the OMB, along with the budget, the agencies review the budgets, they do their justification, and then once the OMB makes their final decision on what they're going to submit for the budget, then it's called the OMB passback. Okay, so that's all I got to say on that page. All right, presidential actions and budget formulation, 1, 2, 3. All right, page 1/1/23. What I want to point out here, based on the law, and I think later on we'll go over what the actual law that states this. The president must submit the budget, the federal budget, to Congress no later. It doesn't say has to be on the first Monday in February. It says no later than the first Monday in February. So let's say we're in 23, so FY 24, that budget needs to be submitted to Congress no later than the first Monday in February, prior to the budget year that begins 1 October. So FY 24 needs to be in their hands. So that's what it says. President's budget is sent to Congress no later than the first Monday in February. That's going to come up multiple times in this study guide. All right, page 24. So the budget process is a little bit different than a general proposal. So what did I say about the general? General proposal goes from Congress, they vote on it, then they agree and resolve their differences in the conference, then they enroll it and send it to the president for the president to sign. The budget is a little bit different because the budget comes, which is crazy, but that's how our system is set up. The budget comes from OMB, goes to the president, that's the president's budget, goes to Congress. Congress do their markup. Whether we like the budget, no, we don't like this area, fix it, whatever. And then the final budget goes back to the president for the president to sign for it to become the nation's budget, the federal budget. So understand the little dynamic there is different. All right, so page 24 talks about congressional action with the budget. So once OMB sends it to Congress, no later than the first Monday in February, what are the things Congress does? There are 3 phases at the bottom of page 24. Budget resolution, authorization process, and the appropriation process. So we're going to look at each one. I don't really focus on timelines like on page 25, because I first need to understand the process before I'm worried about when something is done. I got to know what's going on. So I'm going to jump to page 27. So the first phase, when the president submits the budget to Congress, remember there's one House and one Senate together. They make up Congress, and they have internally different committees. So you have a committee that's responsible for the budget resolution process. What is the budget resolution process? That's where the term concurrent. Remember when we talked about in the beginning, concurrent resolution? It's where internally Congress is figuring out, okay, what's going to be the guideline we use as a group to review the president's budget. They want to know, okay, what's our deficit? What was our interest rate? So whatever it is, what were our expenses for the last 5 years? So those are the things that are resolved in the budget resolution process. What you need to understand is which House and which Senate is responsible for the budget resolution process. So if you can see on your study guide, you have the House Budget Committee and the Senate Budget Committee on one side. The House on the left and the Senate on the right. Simultaneously, that same budget, they're determining what the guidelines are going to be. But remember, they have to do it uniformly. So at some point, the House and the Senate must come together. What is it called when the House and the Senate comes together? Mr. Mize?
Is it general? A general resolution?
No, what is the in the process where they're trying to resolve differences? What is that process called? Ms. Norris, go ahead.
Committee.
The committee, right? Conference committee? Oh, excuse me. Conference. So that's what we already discussed happens the same way with the budget resolution process. When the budget takes from the president no later than the first Monday in February, and what I'm doing is not that I'm losing my mind, I'm repeating it so that my mind can remember it. So that's the same way when you're studying, repeat it again. The budget goes, OMB submits it to the president sends it to Congress. Congress go through the budget resolution, authorization, and appropriation process. In the budget resolution process, the House Budget Committee and the Senate Budget Committee is responsible for that process. The same thing that happens on the House side happens on the Senate side. They eventually have to come together to resolve differences in a conference committee. What's another name for conference committee? It's also called the third chamber, right? So all I'm doing is tying, oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Fargo. I didn't look up fast enough. I need to pause. All right. So under on the middle of page 27, so what it's telling you, Congress has CBO. They have a budget office, as I mentioned earlier. So what is the purpose of the CBO? Congressional Budget Office provides the total budget outlays. I'm going to explain outlay in a minute. New budget authority. So they're bringing them the numbers. Think of an accountant. All right, I need to know where we are before I start making plans for the future. So that's what's being done in the budget resolution. All right, who could tell me what's an outlay? Any takers? I don't see any takers. So an outlay, okay, go ahead, Miss Tina.
I'm on guess here. Isn't that an obligation? No.
Not an
The amount of Money
obligation.
spent on something. It's a disbursement, the amount of money spent on something.
Thank you,
Disbursement.
Anna.
I like
Hi, Anna.
disbursements because in our world, we
Hey, Tina.
typically use, go ahead. Okay, thank you, Miss West. So in our world, we typically hear the word disbursement. The outlay is the formal term of when the funds are removed from the treasury. You write a check, use the credit card, whatever it is, you obligate the funds. Now you're paying for that item. When the money comes out of the treasury to pay for that, which for us is disbursement, that is called an outlay. That's going to come again several times in the study guide. So I just wanted to make sure I put that out there. All right, so Congressional Budget Office provides all this information to the House Budget Committee and the Senate Budget Committee. Understand the key thing with the budget resolution. I said it's a concurrent resolution. Does the concurrent resolution go to the president for signature? Or does the budget resolution process go there? Does the president need to sign it? Go ahead, Ms. Tina.
No,
Or-
he does not.
He does not, because that's why I keep using the term from the beginning. Only the joint resolution and the bill goes to the president for signature. If it's a concurrent process, which that's what this is, it's affecting both of them. Concurrent process does not go to the president for signature. So once they resolve what the guidelines they're going to use for the president budget, then they move on. Page 2, 1129, page 29 is the authorization process. And oh, by the way, it's a different House and a different Senate that's responsible for this process. It is the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee. They are responsible for the authorization process. The process is the same. Whatever the authorization document is reviewed by the House and the Senate. If they have any disagreements, they come together to resolve it in a conference committee or the third chamber. When they resolve their differences, they have one document that they have to send forward because the authorization and the appropriation must go to the president for signature. The key thing, so that's one, it goes to the president for it to become law, the authorization law. The key thing to understand with the authorization process is it is authorizing the programs. The primary things that we want, or we say that it's okay for you to pay, to use funding on for that fiscal year. So if funding is listed in the authorization process, as you know, it does not give us budget authority. It doesn't give us any money. We can't do anything with it. It might say, okay, these are the programs you're authorized for FY 23, for fiscal year 23. Okay, that's nice, but I don't have any money. And so the purpose of the authorization process is to authorize programs. And it's the responsibility of the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee. The third one is on page 31 is the appropriation process. You also have a different House and a different Senate responsible for it. You have the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Appropriation Committee. If you look, you see the diagram, it's exactly the same. The process is the same. The appropriation, for us to get money, budget authority, it has to end up going to the president for the president to sign for it to become law. The purpose of the appropriation process is to provide the funding. Authorization law, appropriation law. Authorization law authorizes program. Appropriation, I'm going to use the word authorizes the funding, because they're going to try to mix you up with authorizing funding. What? So how could you see this again in the near future? If I say during the authorization process, you receive 1 million for this program, and during the appropriations process, you receive 2 million, how much do you have for that program? Who can tell me? I'll leave it simple.
2
Whatever the
million.
program is. Go ahead, Ms. West.
So it is only what the program is. So if they actually appropriate, if they give you an appropriation of 2 million, even though the program was 1 million, you still only get 1 million. Is that what you're saying?
Is that
Or
your
is it the
final answer?
appropriation? No, it's not. I would have thought that whatever you're appropriated. So if you were appropriated the 2 million, you get the 2 million.
Okay, hold that thought. Ms. Vanger, what you got?
I will say it's 2 millions.
2 million.
Yes,
So
because
I
the
wanted to
appropriation
point that
process
out.
is the funding.
Right, so that's what gives you the funding. Because yes, Congress can give you more money in a program that they want you to have and spend. So just remember, if you see the question, say if it's the authorization, okay, they're authorizing programs. It don't matter what kind of money is listed in the authorization. They didn't give you no money until you get to the appropriation. And if the appropriation process ends with giving you more money for that program, that's how much you have for that program, regardless of the authorization. Yes, Ms. Burns, go ahead.
You know what, Ms. Helen, since you explained that, okay, that makes sense, because I agree with Anna that, well, that's what you asked for and that's what they're giving you. But I mean, well, that's what you asked for, but if they're turning around and giving you an extra million, never mind, because that's a different conversation right there. But
No,
okay.
it's actually a law, and that's why I always find a point to bring it out. Because remember, what's the purpose of your congressman or congresswoman? They want to get re-voted back into that position.
Right.
So if they know that particular program is going to bring more money into their areas, their
Yeah.
constituents, they might vote, and it collectively, if they all agree, they might give you more money than you asked for, because in the end result, people are going to remember, oh yeah, my congressperson, yeah, they gave us money for this program, you know. So that's why, yes, that's why I didn't go the other way. I didn't say you got less. And likewise, it's the same way. You can ask for $1 million for that program, and then when they appropriate it, they might give you 500,000.
Well,
What
see,
you
I've
have
seen
is
that.
500,000.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so that's
Okay.
why I want you to
Okay.
think of it that way. So whatever
Okay.
shows up in the appropriation or whatever funding document trickles down to you, that is what you have to obligate for that program. Okay? Any other question on this? So that's why I had to pause there to make sure that everyone understands, because I've seen it asked different ways, and people usually get back with me with feedback and like, hey, they tricked me on this one. Not really a trick. It makes you, and what they'll do, they can do, and again, as a test writer, is even when talking about the appropriation, they might use the word authorized. So in the appropriation law, you are authorized to spend the 2 million. And yeah, that's why you're like, okay, what's the primary thing they're talking about? authorization law versus appropriation law. Yes, I can be authorized in the authorization law. I can also be authorized in the appropriation law. So don't let the words trick you up. Any other questions? All right, so we deal with that. So on page 33, what it's telling you is there are actually, if you read the paragraph, there are 12 different appropriations. So on the bottom of page 31 up to 32, they give you a list of the different types of appropriation: agriculture, commerce, energy, defense, homeland, and so forth. And then on page 33, I jumped there because this is specific to Department of Defense. These are the three DoD defense-related appropriation: defense, military construction or veterans affairs, energy, and water development. So that's why I brought you back here. So of the 12 appropriations, these are the three specific. Again, it's a defense exam you're taking, so you might want to know what are the three DoD-related appropriations. 34, 35 just talks about, okay, you can go back to Congress and appeal if they don't like what the initial budget was. Agencies can revise. And remember, when you're submitting a budget request, by the time it gets to the president for, let's say, FY24, that's about almost a year that whole process, budget estimate submission process started. So these are estimates. So sometimes agencies, depending on current data, they can revise their original estimates. Page 36 talks a little bit about continuing resolution. I've seen more. You'll see continuing resolution in the different modules later on. So just remember the basics with the continuing resolution. No new starts when you're operating under CR. You have to keep within the same rate of operation as you did the year prior. What else? So those are two primary things. What else do you know about CRs? So I think that's basic. So remember, continuing resolution is a stopgap. It's a temporary appropriation. Because if you don't have an appropriation law, the government shuts down. Based on what portion of the Constitution? What portion of the Constitution says the government will shut down if I don't have an appropriation? Check on learning. That's a check on learning. Who can help me out?
Is that Article 1, Section 9?
Yes, ma'am. Article 1, Section 9. All right. Ms. Tina been studying.
I had nothing but time to over this past year, so.
Okay, awesome. All right, so understand, starting on page 38, they go a little bit into, which is really fiscal law, because not only you have all these appropriations, then we deal with purpose, time, and amount. You'll see it in more in-depth in module 3, but we'll also go over it because understand that fiscal law makes up the majority of the questions for these exams. And the exams will not tell you, all right, you're in module 1.1. These are questions from 1.2. No, it'll be just series of questions from different areas within the study guide of that section to include the fiscal law. So every appropriation has a specific purpose, time, and amount. So based on how we spend them, as everybody should know by now, is you want to make sure that you're using the right authority, the right purpose, right timeline. Every appropriation has a specific timeline. And so you got to make sure, is it in the expired state? Is it current? Is it a closed account? What's going on? We need to know that, those things. Amount, certain amount you get it for, just like I said, whatever is appropriated. Now, I use the word appropriated for DoD level, but by the time it trickles down to us, we know we're not going to get all that. We get a certain amount. So based on how much at your level you get, that's what you're allowed to spend. All right, page 39. Let's see if I want to do it that way. All right, let's see. Appropriation bill to apportionment, because I need to introduce some terms to you, and I don't know if I want to do it this way. Let me see if they have the little, yeah, so the little charts a little on page 45, but we'll touch on it a little bit. All right, so the chart on the bottom. So remember, after Congress goes through budget resolution, authorization, appropriations, once they sign the budget, then there's a series of events that occurs, just like we just have a budget. So understand now the next series of events that happened after the budget was signed. Because the budget tells the Treasury that the law is effective. So let's look at some of the terms at the bottom. As soon as possible, on the bottom of page 1139, the Treasury receives notice and issues Treasury warrant. So that's one thing. And then the second thing, within 10 days of the appropriation, OMB negotiates, I'm going to explain this in a minute, apportionment on the SF 132, and then OMB has 30 days to send them their money. All right, let me put it in simple terms. When Congress appropriates the funds, two things happen. The Treasury receives a notice and issues Treasury warrants. All that is notice to the field and everybody, hey, your bank account's been set up. You can start spending. That's step one. That's the legal part that's tied to that Constitution. The second thing that happened, remember OMB, Office of Management and Budget? Now they begin what's called the apportionment. All these A words, so you got to know the difference. And anytime you hear apportionment, you're like, okay, who apportions money? OMB apportions. So OMB begins the apportionment process. What does this look like? So once Congress appropriates the money, the agencies, Department of Defense and all those other guys submit an SF 132 up to OMB. It's like saying, hey, I see you got your money. I need my money, right? So the SF 132 is DOD saying, all right, I see the budget's approved. Give me all my defense funding. Here's my SF 132. And then they negotiate, okay, you're not going to get all of it up front or whatever. OMB is going to keep a certain amount of that funding or whatever is worked out between OMB and the agencies within 10 days. And then once they finalize that negotiation, OMB has 30 days to issue the funding. Any question on that? And I'm gonna go over that again in a little bit when they bring it up again in the page 145. So some other things on this while you're thinking is highlight is quarterly. So once you receive the SF 132 apportionment, then the agencies have to complete an SF 133. It's more like an execution report. All right, so we gave you X amount of dollars. Your phase plan said you were supposed to spend this amount by this date. Explain it. So quarterly, the agencies must report their status of funds. Basically what it is on an SF 133. So the 132 is the apportionment document that the agencies submit to OMB within 10 days of that appropriation law, and OMB has 30 days to send them the funding. Agencies must complete an SF 133 expenditure report quarterly. And the rest of it you can read through. So on page 40, all it's doing now is telling you again about the Treasury Department issuing, let me see. So when they wrote it on page 39, it says appropriation warrant, right? And then when you come to page 40, it says appropriation warrant. It can also be called, let me see, Treasury warrant. So make sure that if you do it on page 40, an appropriation warrant is the same thing as a Treasury warrant. TREA, as I'm writing it on my book. So the Treasury can issue a Treasury warrant or an appropriation warrant. And then on page 41 is going over the things I just said with the apportionment process. OMB apportions funds to the agencies. Page 42 goes into deferrals, where they can put, once Congress appropriates the money, the president can request to postpone or move funds around. You can read through those. Rescissions, to cancel. Hey, we asked for money in this area back then, but we don't need it now. Can we take that money, put it something else, somewhere else? Whatever Congress approves, if we don't want it in that manner, then we have to go back to Congress to request that approval to move that funding. Once the agencies on page 43, like the Department of Defense, so you could put agency is the same thing as DOD. It doesn't come down to our level if you don't work directly at OSD level. So OMB apportions funds to DOD and DOD issues allotments. So when we receive our allotment, we commit, we obligate, and what is the other term that I use for disbursement? Because it's not disbursement on this exam.
It's an outlay.
Outlay. And you're going to see it again. They do not use the word disbursement in the study guide, because that's not the official term. All right, so that's what it's talking about on page 43, 44. And DFAS makes payment. All right, so the diagram on page 45 kind of try to relay what I was trying to explain to you beforehand. Ooh. Okay. All right, so Congress appropriates. I'm looking at the diagram on page 45. Office of Management and Budget apportions. DOD issues allotments. All right. And then with the allotments, we all commit, obligate, and outlays the fund. And it gives you the definition on the bottom of 45. Funds that have been actually moved from the Treasury, or in our term, disbursement. And then once the execution process begins, we got to go into auditing. So, right, you got to make sense of what you're studying. Page 46, 47 is talking about auditing. Now that I've given you the money, now I need to monitor. I need to review. All right, so we do those execution plans, and then we have to explain what it is that we're spending the money on and so forth, administrative control and so forth. So that's 46. Then 47, a new player is involved. The GAO, Government Accountability Office. And you gotta just picture in your mind, and I'm gonna figure it out how to do a diagram, process map. Who does the GAO work for? Anybody can answer.
The executive branch? The
Executive branch. Let me get somebody else. Try it.
Okay.
Let's try it.
Is it
Congress,
Congress?
right?
Congress?
Congress.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. West, Ms. Vanka. All right, Congress is correct. So think about it. Congress says do with these funds, don't. Congress don't have time to check to make sure we're doing the right things with the funds, so they have the GAO, Government Accountability Office. So the GAO is an external auditing agency that reports directly to Congress. They say, all right, Congress says the law, you can spend funding on this, but not this. We got fences, we got floors, we got all kind of limitations on how we spend the money, but we don't have any checks and balances. Here comes GAO. So GAO provides the oversight for the executive branch. Why do I say the executive branch? Who the budget comes from initially? So think about that budget formulation process. Who
From
initiated?
the Office of Management and Budget?
Right. Office of Management and Budget. So what branch of government does OMB works for?
Executive.
The executive branch. So if you see it, because I've had people come back and be like, GAO is the oversight of the executive branch? Yes, because they're oversight over the budget. The budget is submitted no later than the first Monday in February by the president. So if you see it and it says oversight of the executive branch, that is a correct statement. Oversight of the federal budget, that is a correct statement. So GAO is another key player that you will see extensively. OMB, GAO, and later on we look at the USD comptroller. All right, so you got some terms starting on page 48, planning, budget process, budget execution on 49. Let me see, borrowing authority, budget. So everything we do with federal funding, if you haven't figured out by now, we have to have some type of authority to use it, to spend it, to borrow for contracts and so forth. Commit contract authority. You got outlay 50. So I'm just looking over these diagrams and statements. You can read through the definitions, pretty straightforward. I'm going to take it over to page 1151. Now, where does the government get its funding? So with these diagrams, I do not recommend that you learn the percentages because things change, but understand the impact, like which group is bigger than the other. So what am I talking about? Federal revenue. How does the federal government make its money? Well, let's look a little deeper. The revenue comes from, in the bottom of page 51, individual income tax. It says already is 50%. So that's the largest group. So even if you don't remember the percentage, you know that the majority of the federal revenue comes from individual income tax. And then the second one is Social Security, Medicare. When they take that money out of your paycheck, Social Security and Medicare. Then the smaller ones, corporate income tax, excise taxes, and other. So the impact, if you see this again, individual income tax. So if you see you on, when they have those political debates about raising taxes, they have no choice because that's where the majority of the funding comes from for the government. So income tax, Social Security, Medicare are the two major sources of revenue. All right, here's the party, the fun, page 52, spending, right? Because don't we all do that? We spend more, most of what comes in. So the expenses of the government is broken down into two categories on page 52. Mandatory bills, or what we use must funds, and discretionary spending. So look at it. The mandatory bills based on the 2020 study guide is we have 70% must fund that we have to pay for. So that tells you the discretionary part, whatever is left for education and whatever else new incentives is only 30% left for everything else. And oh, by the way, so let's look at the bottom of page 52. National Defense discretionary, 15.3, non-defense discretionary, 14.7. So of the discretionary budget, you can see that the Department of Defense gets half. And then the other half is used for everything else that we have to do as a country. So your must fund, you got to pay people for their Social Security, their Medicare, and other mandatory. We got to pay interest on our debt. Those are all the mandatory ones listed under there. So 70% of the nation's expenses or bills are must funds. Then 30% is discretionary. And oh, by the way, the defense takes half of that discretionary budget. So again, when they're looking for cuts, that is why they go to the defense budget to try to make cuts there, because we get over half of what is spent. We spend half of that. All right, so the last, let's see, 53, last couple pages, these diagrams, is making sure now that you review the laws as it states, like that first one on 53. The 1921 Budget and Accounting Act is what requires the president to submit that budget annually to Congress, no later than the first Monday in February. All right. And then you have 1974. What was the difference? Change fiscal year. Did you know the fiscal year used to be from July to June? I didn't know that until I started studying the study guide. And so that was Congressional Budget Impoundment Act. Some of the bigger ones that you need to know on page 54, that first one, the 1990 Chief Financial Officers Act, right? Established chief financial officers. We got to make sure we're monitoring our expenditures. We got to have people in place. And if you, the fourth one down is the line item veto that I mentioned earlier, and it explains it a little bit more. And this is the only spot where I've seen it in the study guide. So if you want some more information, a lot of this stuff you can Google to get some more detailed instructions. All right, so this concludes CDFM module 1.1. So I'm open to any last minute questions. If you have not already subscribed to our YouTube page, please do so. It doesn't cost you anything. What it does is the more people that click a button, type comments, click a like or something, is then YouTube will then start advertising those videos more on people's feed because they see attraction there. So please be sure to subscribe so you can get the updates. So if I have no issues with this upload, then this video will be uploaded to the YouTube and I'll send a notice. You'll see it on this link on the Teams, and I'll try to upload it on YouTube. If I have issues, I will just redo the session at a later date where I can upload it on YouTube. All right, any questions, concerns, or comment? You still got about 2 minutes. All right, that's all I have for today. This is Helen Thomas, and Ms. Tina, you have something?
No, I just wanted to tell you, thank you again, very, very much.
Okay, yes, ma'am, your word.
Thank
your
you, ma'am.
words. Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you
This is
very
Helen
much,
Thomas
ma'am.
and
You
the
have a great day.
CDFM study group. If you have particular questions, I'll stand by. If you don't have anything else, you can go ahead and fall off. I'll stand by for a couple of minutes until 1 o'clock.